Good morning. My name is Lande Ajose, and I am the Vice President and Walter and Esther Hewlett Chair in Understanding California's Future and Senior Fellow here at PPIC. Thank you for joining us today. PPIC is pleased to present this program featuring a discussion with local and statewide leaders about the critical role of infrastructure in promoting opportunity, equity, and sustainability for the state's diverse communities. Before we jump into our program, I have a few housekeeping items to mention. Today's event is part of PPIC's 2022 Speaker Series on California's Future. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. We'd very much like to thank our sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. These organizations are listed on your screen and on our website. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and the PPIC Corporate Circle, groups of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. We hope you'll consider joining us as a sponsor or donor so that we can continue to make programs like this possible and ensure that they're free to attend. More information is available at ppic.org. And finally, before we begin, if you have a question for one of our panelists or all of our panelists, please send an email to the address on the screen, which is ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. If you would include your name and organization along with your question, then we'll set aside 15 minutes at the end of the program to answer those questions. And finally, I would now like to welcome our panelists. Their bios can be found on the PPIC event page. And so in the interest of time, I will only offer brief introductions. First, welcome to Toks Omishakin, Secretary of the California State Transportation Agency. Next, I'd like to welcome Danny Wan, Executive Director of the Port of Oakland and President of the California Association of Port Authorities. And finally, I'd like to welcome Acquanetta Warren, the Mayor of the great city of Fontana. Welcome to all of you. I wanted to start with our first question, which is, given the major federal and state investments in infrastructure that we're expecting, what should be the state's top priority in the next few years? Can we start with you, Secretary Omishakin?
Sure thing, Lande. Good morning. Good to see you. You did some tremendous work while you were working for Governor Newsom on education and many other fronts. So thanks for your work there. And thanks for the work you're doing at PPIC now and everything that PPIC is doing in our great state. So to your first question, what should we be focused on? I think it's important to note that this is truly an opportune time for us. All of us that are working in the spaces addressing public policy, especially related to infrastructure. This is probably the first time in the last 70 years since President Eisenhower started us down a path of building big highways across America to have this amount of investment. The federal government has said $1.2 trillion aside for infrastructure, and specifically $550 billion for transportation of that 1.2 trillion. The opportunity before us is really to try to tackle the safety challenges we have on the transportation system, the equity challenges that we've had for many, many years, and of course, the climate related impacts as well. And I'll just touch on those just very quickly before my colleagues get to share their thoughts as well. From a climate standpoint, it's very clear. I mean, transportation is the biggest emitter. It's the biggest problem. It's the biggest culprit as it relates to environmental challenges that we have in the state. Nearly 50% of the GHG in the state comes from transportation. So all the wildfires that we're seeing, historic floods, droughts, all these extreme weather events that we're seeing in our state, transportation plays a significant role in why we're seeing those things, those outcomes. From an equity standpoint, we know that we're the richest state in the nation, but we also happen to have some of the poorest demographics in the nation as well. So we have to do more to provide choices and connections for people to be able to use our system. And as we do that, we can't have the negative outcomes that we had over the last 50 and 60 years as we were building the system by dividing communities. Transportation is supposed to be a uniter, not a divider. And so as we build this future moving forward, how does it continue to unite? And from a safety standpoint, we lose 10 people every single day on the transportation system of the state, 10 people. Alarming numbers, more than 3,600 people every year. So how do we reverse that? How do we make it safer for people to walk, bike, use transit, and even drive in our state? And so a huge opportunity in front of us with the federal investment, Governor Newsom's proposed investments through the general fund, through the revenue of the state as well. So excited about this opportunity and glad again to be here with Director Warren and Mayor Warren.
Thank you so much. I have about 14 follow-up questions after that, but I'm going to hold them as we go to Director Warren and ask him to respond to the same question, which is really what should be the top priority for our state in the next several years.
Well, certainly, thank you, Lande. Thank you, Secretary and the Mayor, for being on the same panel together. I absolutely agree with the Secretary. I think resilience, equity, and making sure that our economy based on an energy source that is not going to further pollute our environment is certainly going to be our top priority. But within that, we also know that in the last pandemic, we've shown something that has popped up sort of unexpectedly. I think most people's screens being ever present to me in my job, but to everybody, we now know that goods movement and moving our goods and making sure that we get our supplies and, but importantly, getting our goods that we manufacture here in California out to the world has become a very, very present sort of resilience issue that we now must face. And what am I saying? Well, everybody knows that now we are discovering that we have to wait a long time for our supplies to come in when we usually used to be able to get it right away. Now we have to wait, and even if you could get it. We also know that in this goods movement sort of crisis that we've experiencing, it is a crisis for many of our exporters. Our winemakers, our grape nut growers in California, our ag communities are having problems getting their goods out to the world, which speaks to California's position in the world in terms of our position as a supplier of ag goods in the world, as well as jobs. Here at the Port of Oakland alone, we provide our sphere of influence here in terms of job produced by the Port of Oakland's activities, 84,000 jobs. And we know that the ag community, ag sector in California is billions of dollars in taxes, revenues, and also revenues for our jobs in our Central Valley as well. And our manufacturing facilities and also companies like Amazon all depends on efficient goods movement. So one of the things that we do need to invest in is a capacity at the ports in California, as well as the ability to move those goods from the port to the east and to our consumers and throughout the nation, as well as move our goods from California out to the world. So that is going to be hopefully one of the subjects we'll be discussing in terms of how do we invest that. And we're very excited. I agree with the Secretary. This is a once in a generation kind of investment that federal government is making in ourselves. So we need to pay attention to developing a policy to spend that money well in a way that's most effective.
Great, thank you so much. Mayor Warren.
First of all, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to be with these two great men and yourself. I follow both of them and I'm going on every word they say because they're the mentors. As we all know, our focus has to be on the aging of our infrastructure, and it's aging, particularly in the state of California. Our infrastructure assets are costly, long-term investments, and sound infrastructure is the backbone of our local economies. If those investments aren't taken care of, it's going to decrease business productivity, it won't connect workers to jobs, and it certainly won't build thriving communities. And that's what we all want. Most cities are fully aware that it's going to take a partnership to approach to solve our infrastructure problems. We're going to need to be creative, and we're going to have to develop consistent funding sources. And it can't all be on the backs of the citizens. But in a way, the federal infusion of these funds is telling us our money is coming back to our state and coming back to our cities. In Fontana, we are expected to rise right above our population as we know it today. And the increase will impact our roadways, our sewers, our water systems, and the city's just not equipped to cover all these on our own. So we're not the only city that is impacted by this kind of growth. And we're looking forward to being one of the cities that shows the way of how it should be done correctly.
Great, thank you so much. And that's a great place to pause, because the kinds of issues that you all three spoke to in terms of the resilience of our infrastructure, the need for investment in our infrastructure is exactly where I want to go. I was reading a document and I learned that California actually has a very poor infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave California a C- grade in 2019 in its infrastructure report, stating that for decades, California's infrastructure has suffered from an acute lack of investment. So I'm wondering if you can each talk about where we have weaknesses in our infrastructure and what is the first priority that needs to be attended to, and how do we think about that as being a comprehensive framework? Any of you?
Yeah, so I can touch on that a little bit. So the ASCE report that you're referencing is one that I believe they do probably annually, and California has roughly always stayed in that range, in that C range over the years. But what's happening today, and by the way, let me start with the history. So much of the investment that we've made in transportation has been focused on expanding the system, on making the system wider and building more facilities, whereas we've invested trillions of dollars on creating the system. And so it's been a tendency to lean the money more towards building new and not maintaining. And the mayor referenced this earlier, but I think a pivot for us has been SB1, which passed in our state in 2017. So we're coming up on actually this month, the 5-year anniversary of SB1 passing. That's generating $5 billion a year, roughly $2.5 billion to the state. The rest of that, roughly $2.5 billion, is going to local government. But the big intent of that bill was to start to focus more on maintenance, not necessarily building big new highways, but redouble our focus on maintenance and making the system more multimodal. So investing more in transit and opportunities for people to walk and bike and fixing the system. And so we've embraced that since roughly 2017. The federal government, the administration that's in now, they're essentially saying to all states, you need to have a fix it first approach to the transportation systems in your state. Focus on that, not necessarily building bigger and new. And I think there's no other state more prepared to have that outlook than we do, than the state of California. So it's a very good point, very good question that you're making there, Lande.
Right, and Mayor Warren, what needs to be fixed first in this fix it first approach in your city, in your community?
One of the things that the secretary talked about was maintenance, and that is so important. Our city has been blessed that we received 4 interchanges because we are considered the goods movement of the United States. We have truck traffic, we have trains, we're 3.5 miles away from the largest cargo airport in the United States, Ontario Airport, with all of, Fed Express, Amazon, all those places. All those trucks end up in Fontana one way or the other, but cars too. We're surrounded by freeways. Those have to be maintained, but then the streets. Mayors and city councils have got to make a priority their street pavement programs. We all know if you take care of your streets, they'll work for you. But if you let them go down, then you have to dig them back out and put them back together. And there we go, spending money on bad. So we have to make sure that every day our public works area is out there with the asphalt, taking care of those potholes, going through at least 3 years and regrinding where necessary, and making sure safe routes to school is a reality. Whoever thought that we had to have a program to develop safe routes to school, because so many young people don't have a safe way to get to their own school location. And we've got to continue to impress upon our public how important it is to walk, how important it is to bike, and make that safe for them to do it. So that's the city's efforts. And we have old bridges all over the United States. Old. You know, sometimes when I'm on the freeway, I go look up and go, is this good to idle under? Is it going to fall on me? And I think with the administration's efforts, we're going to start to see maintenance occur. We're going to start to see things change. And it's up to we cities and counties, particularly the counties. For so many years, several counties thought, we don't have to fix our streets. Yes, you do, especially if you're adjacent to a city. So those changes are going to make a difference.
Great, thank you. Director Warren, any thoughts about priorities, especially as the ports are concerned, or even you have some jurisdiction over Oakland an International Airport, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure, yes. The Port of Oakland actually does the seaport as well as the airport, as well as many miles of waterfront of our recreation, as well as commercial and visitor-oriented kind of facilities. And all these things are our business do the segue into what the secretary and the mayor are talking about, is that we do need maintaining of our systems. But I want to emphasize that when we talk about transportation systems, we're talking about, of course, moving people, but as well as moving goods and products and the people's jobs that depend on that, as well as the integration and making sure that these two, moving people and moving goods, are compatible with each other, so it does not impact our communities in negative ways. So those are very essential things. So from a port's perspective, for example, we do need truck routes. We do need those the roads that are that will support our goods moving trucks and rail in a way that minimizes the impact on our communities. We do need to look at our transportation system, starting from the sea, the coast, where the goods land on the American coast, or where goods transport out as the exit point to the world. So we do need to look at our transportation starting from the ports inland, or from people's jobs and product goods from those inland areas onto the coast. So those are our integrated systems we do need to look at. I'm very excited that Governor Newsom, for example, announced that in his budget proposal, he's going to include a $1.2 billion investment in the ports. That is the very first time that the ports have heard any such investment of that magnitude by the state of California. We're very excited, and we commend the administration as well as the secretary, who's going to be very instrumental in implementing that. And we hope to take some of that money to invest in the ports, as well as to make sure that the ports are done in a way and developed in a way that's friendly and compatible with our neighborhoods as well. So, for example, in green energy and in electricity infrastructure, plugging for trucks, for electric trucks, those are kind of facilities that we're going to be very much investing in.
Great. You know, I'd like to pause and take a little look back. We just finished a series looking at the pandemic, and you know, when we think about building California's future and the infrastructure, the last couple of years have really reshaped all of our lives, and including how people and goods get around. I'm wondering, when each of you thinks of infrastructure in our state, what do you think some of the key lessons were that we learned from the last 2+ years from the pandemic about how our infrastructure is used and how our infrastructure needs to improve? Maybe we could start with you, Director Warren.
Sure. Again, from my perspective, I think the pandemic shown that we need to have a statewide goods movement freight policy. We need to have a system, again, thinking from the port all the way inland, of how that operates. One of the issues that we've encountered in this pandemic that resulted in the sort of clogs at the port and the backup of goods, and also the exporters unable to get their goods out, the ag products get out to the world, and is because this system of port goods movement is so fragmented, with the shipping companies doing their own thing. Then we have the trucking companies doing their own thing, and we have the goods people trying to buy these various segments of these systems to try to get it all lined up, and yet lacking information how to connect those together. Whereas I run an airport too, like I said, you know, when you get to the airport, you're able to figure out when is your plane going to arrive, and you can depend on the airline somewhat. I mean, most times, 90% of the time, that the plane will actually get here to pick you up. And then you can arrange for the bus system, whether you transportation yourself to the airport. The airport is able to coordinate all that information. Surprisingly, this pandemic shown that somebody trying to move goods out of the port can't even figure out when the ship is coming, because the shipping lines is making their own schedule. They're really not talking to anybody. The truckers are trucking company folks, the truckers themselves are very frustrated. They can't figure out exactly where to pick up the goods and when to ship it, and when they're going to have a window at the port to actually get it into the port. And then once you get in the port, how can you get it on the ships? Maybe there's enough slot available to the ships. This system is so fragmented that any clog in the chain, when we talk about goods movement chain, could have a point in which that gets the goods stuck. So we need a comprehensive statewide policy that invests in those kind of coordination, invest in infrastructure that can smooth movement of goods throughout the chain.
A big lesson from the pandemic is greater coordination across all of those entities.
Well, go
ahead.
You know, our supply chain is an ecosystem. And so the infrastructure is more than sewers and sidewalks. It's high-speed internet, roadways, and easy access to major transportation corridors. COVID demonstrated to everyone without a close link, none of us do well. Our infrastructure sits at the core of our supply chain. You know, people were calling me, do you have vacant lots for containers? Because now the containers are stuck at the port. But then they couldn't figure out a way to get the containers from the port to those vacant lots. And whether those vacant lots had to have gravel on them or what happened with that. All of those issues kept coming up. So I agree 100% with the director. We've got to be all on the same wavelength, just like when you do go to an airport or any transportation. The cruise lines do a better job in some cases.
Secretary?
Yeah, thanks, Lande. Look, I agree with everything Director Warren said and the mayor said as well about how much of a system our freight infrastructure is. Really, transportation is in its entirety. There's several silver linings, if you will, if you can draw some silver linings from what was a horrendous period over the last 2 years for many people. But one of the things that I think comes to mind as well is, as far as lessons learned or silver linings, is we can now make a direct tie to the way we've built our system to the climate challenges that we have as well.
Mm.
So in 2020, nationally, we saw a 10% drop in greenhouse gas emissions across America. 10% drop. It's the most significant drop the country's ever seen, period. In one year. And why did that happen? Mainly because you had a huge reduction in flights and people jumping on airplanes, and 35 to 40% drop in VMT across the country as well. So if people doubted at any point that there's a direct tie between poor air quality or bad environmental outcomes, it was right there in our face. If their VMT dropped and people didn't have to, drive every single where in a single occupancy vehicle, the outcomes are going to be better. We saw there were places in LA or close to where Mayor Warren is, where people actually saw the skyline. For the first time, they were like, wow, in the morning, you can actually see the mountains, you can see buildings. It was shocking. But it was because we weren't driving. We were sitting at home and looking out of our windows and working from home. So there's several things that you can draw from what was really a challenging period for us. But the fact that, we can also, we've all talked about this extensively, but telework and how that can be a part of, quote unquote, the system as well. And the fact that we can do so many things from a virtual platform is one of the things, but very much diversifying the system, reducing the dependence on people driving will have better outcomes for our environment in the state.
Let me ask a follow-up question on that. Because when you think about reducing driving. It leads, I think, a lot about how regional of a state we are. We're not just a single state, we're a state composed of many regions. And one of the regions where there's the most driving is in our San Joaquin Valley, up and down Highway 99. There have been plans for many years for high-speed rail. Does the push now, the silver lining, push us more towards getting high-speed rail over the finish line, or is that still kind of stuck where it was, given the cost factors that we know are associated with that particular project?
Yeah, I think it no doubt pushes us more towards needing to get this done. From multiple angles or different ways to look at this issue, the high-speed rail issue, whether it be job creation. I mean, there are to date nearly 7,500 jobs that have been created from us investing so far. What we've invested in high-speed rail. There are more than 35 active construction sites as we speak today on this particular project. So whether it be jobs to actual mobility, being able to get people from Northern California all the way down to LA in this state, and you talk about how regional we are, having the ability to be able to get people and moving people. Director Juan talks about how important it is to think about people movement, not just building in the infrastructure for the sake of building it, but really being focused on people and goods. In this particular case, people. You know, what better avenue do we have to do that than using taking advantage of mass transit opportunities? So I think it clearly sends us more in that direction. We know the environmental benefits of making this investment, and beyond even the jobs, just the pure economic data, the places that have done this. And by the way, just quickly, China is a country that for many years lagged and were behind in investing in infrastructure. Within the last 30 years, they've doubled down and said, look, we're going to focus more on this, essentially copying our model over the last 50 to 60 years of recognizing how important infrastructure is to economic growth. Today, they have over 22,000 miles of high-speed rail, not just any rail, high-speed rail going over 200 miles an hour or more. In America, guess what our number is of high-speed rail? Number of miles, 0. We got none. The 119 miles that's under construction today is going to be a game changer as we continue to get it done. There's no doubt there's a huge expense, but it's important that as CEO Brian Kelly and his team continue to lead us through this, that we help give them the support that they need to help to deliver this tremendous project.
Thank you. I want to stick with this idea of understanding our regions a little bit more and think, Mayor Warren, about the role transportation plays in your regional economy. You already mentioned that you're a hub for shipping and logistics. I know that trucking is one of the major industries in Fontana. Can you talk a little bit about what your priorities are for ensuring that transportation projects contribute to economic mobility, especially thinking about employment opportunities, while also supporting the critical goal of addressing climate change? We already heard the Secretary mention that 50% of greenhouse gases come from transportation. How do you think about squaring the need for attending to climate change as well as the need for ensuring that we have greater economic and social mobility?
Something dynamic happened in our city last year. We, as a council, asked for an air quality study to be done by Rambo, which is an environmental firm that does these air studies. And one of the major issues that came out is that our air quality was good, but it had need for improvement. And a lot of it was related to the ecosystem of all of these buildings known as warehouses, logistics, and transportation. But the other part of that we have seen is that a lot of these buildings are not logistics and transportation, they're manufacturers, and their products get on trucks too. So what we've done is pull together all of the existing state and federal and local laws in one spot, 11 pages of, if you want to build here, this is what you'll have to do, and includes electric charging stations, the refrigerated trucks that had idling because they were trying to keep the product cold. No more of that. Got to have a hook in so that you don't have to idle. The other part is green. Tonight, our council is going to review our first part of an initiative. I want to do 1,000 trees. People have no idea the impact trees can have to your environment. to help you, but also committed to the right truck routes. Don't have truck routes where you have residential areas right there together. Try to avoid that as much as you can. We've got all these roads, so now we're looking at our patterns to see where we can put the trucks away from everyone, but we cannot be without them. Look what it did during the pandemic. People found out they could order products. So guess what? There's no more honey. Go jump in the car and go get some cream. You can get it from Amazon. You'll get it overnight practically. And people were complaining about, the warehouses and all these things, but I went to a community meeting. We met out in the driveway because, as we all know, during COVID, you weren't supposed to be inside. Guess what? Nobody can hear me. You know why? Beep, beep, beep. Amazon backing up, Prime backing up. I said, look, we don't want these facilities. Stop ordering things. They looked at me like, are you crazy? I don't have to even go to the market. Instacart, all these things. So we have to have a balance, and we have to have the conversation, and we have to look toward the future. So many people are opposed to what the secretary was talking about. And it's because they see all the funds that go toward them. But that's what investments are about. You invest in your future. And that's what the governor is trying to do with putting these funds toward these issues. He's investing in California. The old days, I'm an old bird. I'm in my 60s. I don't want to go any further. This is what California used to do. Invest in California. Invest in its people. Invest in its transportation. We got to get back to, as California goes, the nation goes. We can't say that right now, but the commitment is there to get us back.
Thank you. Director Warren, I want to talk a little bit more about what I think was one of the great subplots of the pandemic story, which was the movement of goods through our ports. And now everyone in the United States, including my children, are familiar with the term supply chain. I'm curious to know how the Port of Oakland kept goods moving effectively during that period of time. I'm curious to know what the state of play is right now with the ports, both in Oakland as well as across California. I mean, California has Oakland, it has Long Beach, it has the city of Los Angeles. Can you give us some insight as to where we are now and how things are moving?
Sure. Well, things are improving a bit because, mainly because I think as the demand for imports are slowing a little bit. So we are trying to figure that out. But as we discovered a system, it really, short-term solutions are not that many. It is really a long-term infrastructure solution. As we said, we need to have an integrated system, develop that. Just give you some statistics. When the study was done in terms of efficiency of ports throughout the world, guess what? California ports rank at the lowest of those efficiencies. And when the mayor talks about is, we need our goods, and yet we need to use our land more efficiently that we have, and we need to make it more environmental friendly, and we make it more dense. If you go to Asia ports, you see the container stacks up really about 10 stories high, some points. And yet in California, we have single stacks and we spread all over the place. And that's not using our land efficiently, and that's not using our land in a way that's friendly to our neighborhoods. So we need to invest in the efficiency of the ports. I'll give you another example. In Oakland, we have 120 acres of existing maritime terminal that is not being used for that purpose, even though we talk about, oh, there's so little land, so little capacity. And yet at the port, we have 120 acres of ready deep water port terminal that's ready for use, that could be relieving the congestion and relieving some of the traffic that's backed up into our neighborhoods. Why? Because there has not been the money and investment into that. The transportation secretary said, there is a direct link between investment in infrastructure and improvement in our lives. If we could have invested that money into building that terminal, we would not have the congestion right now, at least being reduced by that capacity that we're not being using right now. So efficiency, using our capacity wisely, and also obviously investing in green energy. The Port of Oakland is trying, have right now 20 trucks or so of electric trucks being experimented on and making sure that it works but we need plugs. We need the electrical infrastructure to bring that electricity down to the port and actually construct those plugs so that the trucks can plug in. We're also talking about hydrogen right now. So all those are not, unfortunately, not short-term solutions, but we really need to look at taking that money, that's the investment coming in, looking at long-term solutions to densify our ports, to make our ports more efficient, and to also invest in green energy. Those has to be the future of the ports in California.
I guess this question is for any of you, which is, I hear that we have once in a lifetime money coming to the state. I hear the need for long-term thinking and deep investment. I hear the need for attentiveness to various regions and various modes of transportation. I'm wondering, is there a state plan? Is there a comprehensive plan that everyone's feeding into? Or is the money going to come to the state, go to lots of different transit agencies, go to lots of just different jurisdictions, and then at the end of the day, we're going to wonder what happened? Can anyone speak to like how we're thinking about this comprehensively?
Well, if I may jump in, I think this is one of my preaching points is that we do. Absolutely, you're right on it. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we could do one of both. We one two ways. We can spend the money on spots and just making sure that we put out the fires, or we could make long-term investments based on a statewide plan, both in terms of moving people and in moving goods. And I've been advocating for the state to really make the investment time to put together a statewide goods movement policy that not only talks about how all the ports integrate with each other, but how it integrates with the highways, how it integrates with separated truck corridors that's away from people, and also how we integrate the communities and how that people and communities integrate and goods movement integrate. So we do need to have a statewide plan. Why? Because then we know where to put the dollars more effectively to implement a statewide policy. When you talk about goods movement, state of Florida, for example, and state of Georgia, and state of Georgia has shot way past in terms of their volume increase. They have a statewide plan, goods movement plan, as to where they want to put the dollars, which port, which highways, which technology. And we need that in California as well.
Great. Mr. Secretary, do you have thoughts about this plan? Is that coming out of your shop?
Yeah, yeah, it is, it will, it has several things I could say about this. So I completely agree with Director Warren's comments about us needing to sort of refocus, if you will, on how all these investments can be better connected. I don't think we're short of plans. I think we're probably short of, I think we could do a better job of communicating and making sure people are engaged in plans. I mean, I could run through a list of things right now that you may have heard of. I mean, there's something called CTP 2050. It's a long-range plan for that Caltrans put together. There's something called CAPTI, California Action Plan around investments in transportation. There are multiple plans that exist that hit on these all these key issues, from how it's going to impact our economy, how it's going to impact air quality and equity. So there's several plans, but communicating on them and making sure they're succinct, that stakeholders, whether it be people like mayors or executive directors who run organizations like Director Warren, everybody kind of knows, okay, here's what they're going to do on freight. For example, there's a freight mobility plan 2020 that exists already. But with that plan that already exists and the investments that Director Warren mentioned that the governor is now proposing through his general fund, how are all those things connected? You know, the existing plan with the new money the governor is proposing. All those things are not clear. So it's improving that communication between several existing plans. That's, I think, probably more needed, not necessarily reinventing the wheel to go create new plans. Before the mayor goes, I know she has some comments on this. We actually have a group as well that's meeting pretty regularly on the infrastructure plan that the Biden-Harris administration has put together. It's called a working group. And they're broken out into a dozen different working groups. So there's a group meeting about bridges. There's a group meeting about ZEV infrastructure, on and on and on and on. There are a dozen groups. So making sure our mayors, our city and county leaders understand those working groups and how we're finalizing, how we're going to make these, how we're going to send these federal investments, how we're going to direct them. All things we need to do a better job of, but I don't think we're short of plans. We have to communicate it better.
Great, thank you. And Mayor Warren, the last comment before we go to our questions. Thoughts about feeding into a plan?
Well, I'll tell you, the secretary is right on about communicating. By the way, I have to tell you, I love our district director, District 8, Michael Buchanan. I stay in his face. We're talking about more than that. We're talking about homelessness. We getting it all in one great heap, and they are amazing. I think each city has come to the conclusion that they have to have a signature project in this that relates to what already has been planned statewide. For instance, we have a historic Malago Bridge. It was completed in 1931 and was part of the Pacific Electric Railroad, and it's in serious need of reconstruction. And it has been the subject of so many traffic concerns. And we seek to remove the traffic constraints and preserve its historic, but at the same time, provide an opportunity for the public to go through it better. And these are the kinds of communications that we need to continue to do. I think we've been all operating in a silo. We all are part of these regional groups, these associations, and we all expected them to do this for us. Those days are over with. Mayors and council members are finding now they have to go straight to the source. I intend to meet with you soon, Secretary. I want to know how I can be part of the solution and also receive your help. But we as regions and we as regular cities and townships and counties have got to open our eyes up to the future. And that means communicating with you too.
Great. Well, thank you. I want to make sure we pivot to, we have several questions coming in from our audience. And the first audience question asks if the panelists could please talk about transit ridership as we continue to emerge from the worst of the pandemic. What will it take for ridership to bounce back, which, as someone mentioned, is important to the states achieving their climate goals? I thought we might start with Danny Wan, mostly because I am a rider of at the ferry, so I'm curious to hear a little bit about how you think things will bounce back, at least in the Bay Area, in terms of the ridership that the port might be engaged in, and then we'll go to Mayor Warren and then to Secretary Omishakin.
Well, so the Port of Oakland, we do host a ferry stop at the port at Jacqueline Square. So if you visit, please take the ferry from Jacqueline Square to San Francisco. But we don't run the ferry. There is a regional ride system in the Bay Area that runs the ferry. It's the acronym is WETA. But my understanding is that ferry ridership has been down during the pandemic, but it's going up. As we noticed that people are going back to work, and then the gas prices go shooting up. These transit systems, including the ferry ridership, is going up. But again, it points to that the port is a partner in that, and there needs to be integration between these different regional agencies. We do run an airport, and that is a transit option for a lot of people who go up and down the state. And I can tell you that our ridership at the airport is also going back to about 80% of pre-pandemic levels. And so we're hoping that is going to be another setup. We're going to be making investment in the airport as we expand the capacity there.
Great. Mayor Warren.
I think the two issues that come to mind that people have talked to me about are safety and convenience. You know, they want to be safe when they're using public transit, but they also want to be convenient. When you get off the public transit, where do you go from here? Do you have to walk to your site? We're exploring different items in San Bernardino County, maybe Uber rides, maybe shuttles, because things are so way out. You know, I visit my family and friends in Chicago, New York, and they all love their subsystem, but when they get out the subsystem, they walk right to their job. It's not that easy here. We're spread it out. So we've got to come up with a way that people are safe, they're feeling convenient, and it's easier to get to their site once they arrive and not have to plug into so many channels to move somewhere.
Great, thank you. Secretary Omishakin, a sense of how transit is playing into all this and what the recovery looks like.
Yeah, I love hearing the mayor talk there at the end about the challenges, because that's where the focus has to be as this rebound for transit happened. I used to work for a mayor, and I miss hearing people talk like she talks, because at the state we're so far removed from some of the action on the ground, and the mayor's hitting the nail on the head. But where the challenge really lies is beyond the safety part, which, you know, you can talk about health safety, crime safety, all important, and making sure this rebound truly happens for transit. But the simple convenience of it, like if it's an inconvenient mode, if it's not a connected mode, people are not going to come back to it. People are not going to choose it. And we don't, the challenge we have in the state is not getting, the challenge we have is getting choice riders, people who have the choice to move in this direction, people like us who have means, who have cars or other ways of getting around. How do you get us to look at this as a viable option? The people who have economic hardships or for one reason or another are, you know, very hard bent on understanding the environmental reasons of wanting to do this. They're doing this already. They're headed in this direction. But people who have the choice, how do you get them there? And I'll just say one thing I think that hopefully plays a big role in this moving forward. The governor has proposed with this year's budget a $750 million incentive to help people in this state for several months, for as long as it can last, to have absolutely free transit across the entire state. Not just, you know, one, you know, major cities or, you know, one particular area, the entire state, free transit for close to $1 billion, $750 million. So hopefully it's something that introduces people to the idea of transit and the benefits of transit, and they stay with it long term. So I can go on and on about this particular issue, but very good point about how we need to make sure this rebound truly happens, and it's happening already.
Question about that 750 million. How long would that last? I mean, is that 1 month of transportation in the state of California? Is it 6 months? How long would it be in effect for people to start to introduce themselves to different forms of public transit if it's passed by the legislature?
It has the potential to be close to 3 months. I mean, just looking at some rough data on the receipts from transit agencies across the state, how much, you know, roughly comes in bills in a month. It has the potential to be for 3 months. So people can potentially experience, you know, an entire summer from July or, you know, August, if we start in August, all the way to when school starts back, of absolutely being able to get around with free transit. But again, to the mayor's point, how do we make sure it's connected and convenient for people when they get off, that they're just not in the middle of nowhere, that there are bus stops there and they can use Uber or whatever else that, you know, get on a bike, other buses to be connected. So
Great.
A big opportunity for us.
Thank you. In my house, that turns into free trips to the ballpark. A question from an audience member in Los Angeles. Could the panelists please talk about the funds each stands to receive from the $1.2 trillion federal infrastructure bill and some of the key ways they plan to spend it? If I'm not mistaken, California stands to receive about, is it 40 billion of that 1.2 trillion? Maybe Mr. Secretary, you could start.
Yeah, so we're probably going to get more than any other entity in the entire country. As far as this infrastructure money goes, I think Amtrak, possibly with President Biden's affinity for rail, they call him Amtrak Joe. They're probably going to get more money than we are, but it's broken up into several different pots, and that CalSTA, our organization, and its departments from Caltrans to High Speed Rail, several different pots that they're going to get, but a significant amount of money for, I'm not going to go through the actual numbers, but the priorities are going to be bridges, focusing on making sure that the mayor and people like Director Warren, that they get dollars to reinvest in maintaining the bridges within their oversight. Focusing on climate is a big part part of the investment, not only in diversifying the transportation system like transit and walking and biking, but also investing in ZEV infrastructure, so charging stations, leaning the state towards investing more in zero emission vehicles. So a huge, significant component being invested in ZEV infrastructure. And then finally, safety and equity are also big parts of it as well. It's not a huge dollar figure, but there's something called Reconnecting Communities. That's a part of the infrastructure bill, where we're going to be looking to see how we can remove barriers that have divided communities across California and of course across the country as well, and safety investments as well. Programs like the Highway Safety Improvement Program have additional dollars to double down on investments for safety in the state. So we stand to get a big sum of money. The working groups that I mentioned earlier are helping to guide how the investment's going to happen with partners across the state.
Great, thank you. Director Wan, any thoughts about that?
Sure. On the infrastructure federal bill, the port specifically has about $2.2 billion set aside for port infrastructure development. And but we also eligible for many other programs that are mainly passed through to the state. So we're going to have conversation with the secretary about that. Also, that goes to port improvement, such as bridges and access roadways and such. But in terms of emphasis, the money we're going to be using for, number one, is to develop our capacity. Like I said, we have a terminal at the port that we need to put to use. And number two, green energy, electrical infrastructure. When we talk about plugging electric trucks, we need that. We're right now somewhat dependent on PG&E, and you know how that story goes. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't. So we need to have resilience. For example, to have solar roofs that we generate on site and then store the battery so that we have stored energy that's generated on site, and then be able to have that loop, a microgrid at the port to be able to supply our green energy at the port. So those are two areas of emphasis, three areas of emphasis: roadways, access, developing extra capacity, as well as green energy.
Great. Mayor Warren.
We're excited. There are several grant programs that we are applying for, visiting great secretaries like the one on this call, talking to him, talking to this great director at the port and the other ports that are adjacent to our area where our trucks and everything come from. But we're also working closely with our federal partners too, our congressional leaders. We've got two of the greatest. We've got Pete Aguilar, Congressman, and also Norma Torres. We're working with them to make sure that as they receive their funds, that they think about the projects. For instance, that bridge I talked about, it would take 15.9 million, but what an impact it would have, not only on our community, but regionally, because people pass through Fontana throughout the region to get where they want to get. It's right on Route 66. Remember Route 66? It's been a disaster area all these years. And now we see the opportunities connecting Route 66 once again, the great route that all of us took back down south once we came to California. We want to revive that route. Its historical significance and safety that it provides to families would be amazing.
Great, thank you so much. That was just about the quickest hour I've experienced in a long time, and we're coming to a close. So I wanted to, as we wrap up, think about this question for each of you. If California gets things right, if we take advantage of this, once in a lifetime investment, if we coordinate our various plans, if we think about the future and invest in zero emission vehicles, we reduce greenhouse gases, we're attentive to our energy needs, we're attentive to issues related to the climate, how will our infrastructure look different in 20 years than it looks right now? Think about what it looks like in 20 years. And if you could each take about 30 seconds to answer that question. If we get it right, how is the state's infrastructure different in 30 years than it is from now? Mayor Warren.
I'm very encouraged that it's going to look more like it should for the times that we live in. We have a great chairman of our board of supervisors, Kurt Hagman, who has a vision. You know, he's talking about little planes taking you to work and all those things that the Jetson that we used to laugh about when we were kids that actually can become a reality. We got the Bright Line from Vegas. Nobody probably wants to hear about that, but that's going to happen, it appears. And that's a great way of people understanding just how important high-speed rail really is. It's something about when you want to get somewhere, you don't care how you get there, and then suddenly you like that mode of transportation. But in the future, it looks like people are able to walk around safely, bike, scooter, whatever they want to do, or even roller skating, because we've made it available. We've made it convenient. We've made it safe. Those two items are the future of the state, making things safe and making things convenient. And then we're doing our jobs. We're supposed to invest in our future. And that's what this administration is doing. And that's what we support.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Director Warren.
Yeah, to get our stuff moving. Hey, I just tell you a story. I know a fairly well-known coffee maker in the United States. Guess what? They get their beans from various places in the world. They get their beans here, and they go to Seattle and they roast it there. Lots of jobs there. They're roasting it, and then they take that beans and they export it to the world. And then at the same time, they import equipment from various countries in Asia. So they have to get all these systems together. In the meantime, do it in an environmentally friendly way so that we don't impact the neighborhood. So if we get this right, we will have those beans coming in fast, get the equipment in, and then have our people who roast it, distribute to the different coffee shops. So we have support those jobs in a quick way. And yet at the same time, we have dedicated truck lanes and trucks and trains all working together in order to minimize the pollution and the impact on the communities. That's what we need to do, and that's what we need to get to a place. And I believe that California is on its way.
Great, thank you. Last word, Secretary Omishakin.
Ditto. I can't say it any better than they both said it, but overall, I would say, considering freight and all the other key components of our transportation system, it has to be people focused. When we look out of the window at the transportation infrastructure of the future, we see people. It's people focused, moving people. Even when you consider freight, it's people focused, and not just building the infrastructure for the sake of moving vehicles, but thinking about the people who are actually going to use it. Hopefully that is our future.
Thank you. We have reached the end of our program. I'd like to thank each of you, Secretary Omishakin, Director Warren, and Mayor Warren for joining me today. I'd also like to thank each of our sponsors, and finally to thank all of you in the audience for joining us online. If you pre-registered for today's event, later today you'll receive a survey, and we hope you'll take a couple of minutes to fill it out and let us know how we did. Once again, thanks for joining us. Please be safe and have a good day.